Everyone joining us. So welcome to My Mexico Mortgage by So Bankable, and um, Brian is going to lead us through this with So Bankable. So please enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is kind of new to me to do a podcast this size, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm not as polished as I could be. I just want to introduce you to So Bankable. We are just gonna. So what we're dealing with, So Bankable is out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and what our goal is we're to arrange financing in Mexico for Canadians and Americans. And obviously, there's a growing demand for real estate in Mexico. We also lend in the United States, but we have seen a lot of people from Canada skip over the US and go straight to Mexico because it's more affordable. There's geopolitical issues that some people are concerned about, and so they're more comfortable actually going to Mexico now than the States. But interesting enough, the people that we were financing in the United States, Canadians, in particular snowbirds, they were buying just to have a second home in the States. What we're finding with Canadians and Americans buying in Mexico is that they're actually planning to retire there. So it's a different person that's buying in Mexico. Regardless, foreign individuals, if they're buying outside of their home country, they have issues around being able to get financing away from home. So we are trying to make it easier for that to happen. So we provide access to financing Mexico, US, and Canada. So who are we? You're going to see two names, CapLink and So Bankable. CapLink itself is, the full name is CapLink Financial Corporation. We've been in operation for 27 years in Canada. So Bankable is actually our brand. We didn't, frankly, when we moved into the United States, any word with the word cap in it was beaten to death, and we wanted to look for a fresh new platform and landed on So Bankable. So CapLink itself, we've been in operation for 27 years in Canada as a mortgage investment firm. We're licensed in Canada in 5 provinces: Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. That is licensed as a mortgage broker and mortgage administrator. We are also licensed in Canada under various securities regulators as what's called an exempt market dealer, an EMD, also as an investment fund manager. So in the United States, we're currently licensed as a mortgage banker in Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Texas, and Washington. So we lend in 5 Canadian provinces, 35 US states, and 6 Mexico states. All our loan origination and administration is done in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada currently. And just so you understand, CapLink is regulated by 17 federal and regional mortgage and securities administrators in 3 countries. So I bring this to your attention because, we have, since working in Mexico, we have seen, people are concerned when they come to a lender of any kind, if it's a mortgage broker, if it's the actual lender, providing personal information. And we are in Canada. We are, like I say, we have 17 regulators. So we have a strict adherence to dealing with people's, confidential information. Plus, because of our licenses, we can do things like pull credit checks in Canada and the US, and pull credit histories from CRA and the IRS. And so we can facilitate transactions quite quickly. But what you need to understand is that we're, a legitimate business who's operated for, I hate to admit it, a quarter century in Canada, and we are beholden to many regulators. So we're not fly by night. We didn't just show up last week and start lending. Lending in the United States and Mexico is just an extension of what we've been doing in Canada. So Bankable itself is really a brand. It's a platform that we use for lending now. We've actually trademarked the name in 3 countries, actually more now. And we are developing a platform where ultimately individuals will be able to just go to our So Bankable website and just do their application there. And so that's something that we're working towards doing. So when it comes to buying real estate in another country, because we're the only lender of its type that has licensing in 3 countries, we can help facilitate transactions by using security in more than 1 country. For example, we've had cause where an individual had real estate in Canada, needed to do a quick close in the States. We just leveraged their property in Canada because we could do that very quickly. Once they had title, the loan was pushed down to the United States and it was taken off their Canadian asset. So we have a team of individuals in Canada, the US, and now developing them in Mexico so that we can make the financing process as easy as possible. We also are an agent for foreign currency exchange and banking. And because of our securities dealer registration in Canada, we've got approvals, for example, from the IRS in the United States to process tax numbers, ITIN numbers. And there's a bunch of features that we can provide consumers looking to own real estate in Mexico that they might not otherwise get from another lender. And I can't stress to you how important it is that we are involved in the foreign currency exchange. Our initial experiences in Mexico were that Canadians and Americans who we were dealing with were overpaying on their exchange because as we'll discuss, we lend in Canadian currency. In Canada, the United States, and Mexico, they all have prescriptive processes for securing financing on real estate, discharging loans, all the processes involved. They're pretty similar. None of the countries, no territory within North America prescribes what currency you register your mortgages in. So we can lend in Canadian currency in the US and Mexico. And as we'll discuss in a little bit, that's advantageous not only to Canadians because there's no continuous exchange rate risk, but it's really advantageous to American purchasers. So, and then on So Bankable's website, we're developing tools. If you get an opportunity to go to our website, sobankable.com, you will see, if you scroll down on the landing page, you will see 3 icons, one for Canada, one for US, one for Mexico. If you click on the Mexico icon, it'll take you to our website for Mexico. And as we'll see, there's tools that we've developed on there which are highly useful to you, and they're available on our website. One is our Mexico mortgage calculator. So you'll source that under our resources section. And what you'll do there is you'll plug in just no personal information, just basics on the property you want to buy, and it'll generate not only an estimate mortgage, what we can lend and at what rate and all that type of stuff, but more importantly, it generates an estimated closing costs. If you're familiar with purchasing in Mexico, it's actually more expensive to purchase real estate in Mexico than in Canada or the United States. If you're a Canadian and an American, you're typically used to whatever your down payment is, plus an allowance for appraisal and legal fees, etc. But it's never, for residential property, it's never very high. In Mexico, it's different. It's front loaded where you're going to pay land transfer tax, notary fees, other costs which are unrelated to the real estate transaction directly. In other words, it's not a realtor's fee, it's not a lender fee. It's just required to complete the transaction. Many people are shocked when they find out that they're faced with those upfront costs. So what we do in conjunction with the realtors that are referring us clients is we immediately demonstrate to people what those costs will be. So when we're underwriting the loan, we factor in and make sure that you have sufficient funds to close, so we don't get down to the closing day and you're short money. So right now in Mexico, we're lending in the common areas where you find Canadians and Americans right now purchasing. So Cabo San Lucas, Puerto Vallarta, Huatuco, Merida, Cancun, all the common areas. Legally, we can lend anywhere in Mexico, but it took us a year just to get the legal structure put in place to start lending. So as we expand into other Mexican states, it just takes time. We just can't flip that switch on. When buying in Mexico, you can hold real estate. Well, sorry, let me back up. When Mexico first established its constitution, it did not allow foreign ownership of real estate in Mexico by anybody from anywhere. In 1973, they amended the Constitution such that foreigners could own real estate in Mexico, except in the area they call the restricted zone. If you're aware of that area, it's 50 kilometers or 30 miles within shoreline on the Pacific and Atlantic sides, and it's 100 kilometers or 60 miles within a dry land border, so the US-Mexico border. Anything in that band of land, a non-resident foreign national has to own the real estate through a bank trust. Has to be a Mexican entity that has its name on the title. So when we're lending to you, we're lending to your bank trust or fideicomiso. And so what is a fideicomiso? It allows a foreigner to own within a restricted zone. It offers actually very significant protections for the beneficial owner of the property, because the title is actually held by a bank, and so your title is in effect protected by the bank. It allows us to lend. As a lender going into any market, be it another country or another province in Canada, it doesn't matter. Any lender, bank or private, are going to ask, if I'm faced with a foreclosure, what do I have to do to get access to the property? In Mexico, their foreclosure process is analogous to Canada, United States, but it is exceedingly slow. And under Mexican law, it can take you 3 years to foreclose on a defaulted loan, which is frankly unacceptable to any lender. We use the bank trust because what we do is, when you have a bank trust and you're the owner of the property, the bank is your trustee. You as the rightful owner become the first beneficiary. And then, because the banks want really nothing to do with your property other than to be your custodian of title, they want you to have a backup beneficiary. It's called a substitute, or some people call it the estate. So you have the rightful owner of the property is the first beneficiary, and then the alternate is the second. When we lend to you in Mexico through the bank trust, we actually become the first beneficiary. In effect, we co-own the property with you, except our rights and access to your property is extremely limited, and it only activates in the event of a defaulted loan. And so our position on your title is effective to having the first mortgage position on a property in Canada or the United States, but we actually don't use a mortgage document. So you would find that in borrowing through us, we would be first beneficiary, you, the rightful owner, would be second, and then your alternate would be third. So what loan programs do we offer? Well, there's 3. Conventional takeout financing is what we focus on. So you're purchasing a property and we provide you financing to acquire the property. We also offer bridge loans, but we can't do those in Mexico because of using the fideicomiso. Bridge loans, where a bridge loan being a short-term loan when the lender is in and out in a few months. It's not constructive to you to do that in a trust in Mexico. So where we do it is in Canada or the United States. If you wanted to close quickly on a property in Mexico, or more importantly, if you're acquiring a property that's under construction and you've structured your acquisition such that you are paying the builder advances as work progresses, and you need money to do that, we are not in a position to fund construction loans, particularly on condominium projects, because a fideicomiso requires that a deed exists. And if the condominium building has not been constructed yet, there is no individual title or deed for a condominium unit. So we can't use the trust structure to finance the construction of a condominium unit in Mexico. But what we can do, if you have real estate assets in Canada or the United States, we could advance the funds that you need during the construction phase by taking security on an asset, that you control in Canada again or United States. And then once construction is done and you've taken occupancy, we would transfer the financing to the Mexican property that you've acquired and relinquish our interest in your property in Canada or the US. We also do what we call pre-construction financing. And really what that is it's a pre-approval process that we go through before you acquire a property to be built, so that you know that we're going to be there to provide you financing on takeout. So again, for conventional takeout, it's typically new purchase. We can do refinancing if you own existing properties. The only challenge there on a refinance is if you own the property in your name by chance, or if you own it in a corporation, a Mexican corporation, or even if you own it in a fideicomiso, when we refinance, we have to do a new trust agreement, and that can actually get expensive for the borrower to do that. So right now we've been focused on doing new purchases. We have a maximum loan to value of 70%. And for those of you that don't know, loan to value is simply how much against the value of the property. So if you're buying a $100,000 property, we will lend you up to $70,000. We have a 3 to 5 year term. For Canadians, having terms like 3 to 5 years is normal. For Americans, they like 30-year terms and 30-year amortizations. We can work with both, but our dominant customer right now is the Canadian, and they don't like 30-year terms for some reason, and Americans do. But in all cases, we have a 30-year amortization. What's not on here that I should have put on this slide is that all our loans are open to repayment without penalty. So if at any time in the future you're selling the property, you won't be subject to any costs as far as early termination of the mortgage, regardless of how much term you have on the loan. The bridge financing, again, we secured by using real estate in Canada, the US, and we can work with real estate in Mexico. It just depends on how the Mexican property is owned. On that financing, because it's short term, we don't amortize the loan, so we just interest only. We can't do second mortgages or what is equivalent to second mortgage financing in Mexico because of the trust structure, but in Canada and the United States, we certainly can. So we can work with you to structure something that works for you when it comes to purchasing real estate in Mexico. And then, of course, when we're providing the bridge, the expectation is that we're going to be there with your takeout financing. We don't have to be. Let's say that you had an asset in Canada, you wanted to borrow against it, you had a new property built, you took occupancy, and then you decided you were going to go move from Canada and live in that property in Mexico, and you sold the Canadian asset and paid out the loan you had with us and owned your asset in Mexico clear title. That's totally up to you. We just want you today to understand that we're quite flexible and accommodating to those of you that need a little bit of creative structuring when buying an asset in Mexico. So our pre-construction loan, I just see I got a typo. Sorry about that. I have to admit, I finished this deck 5 minutes before the show started, so it is not as polished as it might otherwise be. So most importantly, we provide pre-approval for financing. Your real estate financing is confirmed before you actually sign the contract with the seller, be that seller a new home builder or an individual just selling their home. So we have this a lot with individuals that we're dealing with. Of course, just like in Canada or the US, they want to know that the money's going to be there for them to close before they go unconditional on an offer and put a deposit at risk. Financing terms and the rate, of course, are predetermined. Unlike experiences we have with lenders in the United States and even Canada, once we commit on an interest rate, it's fixed. The only change would be is if the rate went down. So with us, like if you're an American and you were buying in the States during the time, and even in Canada, where interest rates were jumping up quickly, and you were exposed to rapid changes in interest rates, and then you would try to lock your rate, but you could only lock it for 45 days. In Mexico, realistically, you're looking at 60 days to close on a purchase because setting up a fideicomiso takes 45 to 60 days. So we're not going to put some artificial, temporary rate lock on a deal and charge you for a rate hold and all that stuff that some other lenders might do. We just commit to the rate and hold it. So that's basic presentation. Things that I would like to bring to your attention that I didn't put in the slide deck. When you're acquiring real estate in another country, it's very unnerving. You don't know who your lawyer is going to be. It may be your initial contact with lawyers. They may not be bilingual. It's a whole new legal experience for you. With the individuals that we work with, we have a legal team that is fully bilingual, and they walk you through the process from start to finish. They guarantee the title, which is very unusual. Unlike Canada and the US, where they have land title systems that are very automated, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I would say we're a little more sophisticated in that system in Canada and the US. In Mexico, they certainly have a valid deed registration system, but it is cumbersome. It involves several different registries, which when you're buying a property requires that your legal counsel searches to make sure there's no impediments to your title, but also when it comes to registering the fideicomiso and even discharging, there's a process that they have to go through. So you really want to have competent legal counsel, to assist you. We help you with that. We handle the appraisals for the property. Again, we handle your financing and make it as easy as possible. When it comes to underwriting you, if you're an American, you'll know how painful it can be to get a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loan. The due diligence almost abusive in some cases. So you understand who CapLink is. CapLink is a private mortgage lender in Canada. We are not actually, even though the name So Bankable might suggest we are a bank, we are not. That is advantageous to you because we have our own underwriting guidelines, and really there's 4 tenets that we pursue when approving somebody. Number 1 is your credit score. If you have a 660 credit score, either Equifax, we pull credit reports in Canada and the US, and they're all through Equifax. So if you have a 660 or better, that's good enough for us. When it comes to the down payment, as I discussed earlier, we look for not only sufficient cash to close on the purchase, but also to meet all the closing costs requirements. So when we're testing you to make sure you have sufficient funds to close, that's what we're doing. And then, of course, verification of income. is important to us, but we're more generous in that area than a typical bank would be. Uh, you know, for example, we don't expect that you're going to own the real estate in Mexico and never rent it. In the United States, when we're financing down there, we because we're a mortgage banker in the States, we can use institutional and we can use our own money. And we've seen it with institutional parties. They will allow a certain amount of the rental income, but they'll surcharge the borrower because it is rental income. And they treat rental differently than owner occupied. We don't do that. We don't want to put our borrowers in a position where they're going to lie to us and say, oh, it's a principal residence, I'll never rent it. We'd rather you rent it. Like, we encourage you to look at renting it, because it's not realistic for you to afford a second home in another country and not have some means to subsidize the cost. So in that regard, what we'll do is work with the borrower. If their personal income in Canada or the US is not sufficient to fully qualify for the loan, but we expect that they're going to rent it, we will take some allowance of rental income and apply it to servicing the debt. So we are trying to help you qualify. So again, there's 4 tenets we pursue. One is available funds to close, creditworthiness, debt service capability, and the 4th one is out of your control, and all it is an appraisal, as we would do in any other country, to confirm the value of the property. So if we can green light those 4 items, then our financing is unconditional and we proceed to close. Just to give you an idea how effective that is, we had a deal sent to us. It was a Canadian, sent to us in Canada by a Canadian mortgage broker. And because the Canadian mortgage broker had such a nice package done on the borrower, we approved the loan subject to appraisal only the same day we got the application. And we immediately instructed our lawyer, because it was time sensitive. It was mid-October of 2023, and the borrower had to close mid-December. And so we immediately instructed our lawyers to proceed because we were satisfied. We all were confident because of the property that we would get a satisfactory appraisal. So we moved ahead because, as I said earlier, the fideicomiso can take 45 to 60 days. So when you're acquiring real estate in Mexico, we cannot close in 2 weeks. You can't, we can't. So one cautionary note is, when you're negotiating the acquisition of real estate, you need to be mindful and give yourself sufficient time to close. In that instance, the realtor for the client, who is a Canadian working in Mexico, phoned me in a panic because when they found out they were getting financing, they had very poor success with other lenders lending to Canadians in Mexico. And at the time, they were all upset because they thought there was no way we could close on time, 2 months from the date that we had approved the loan. But we had all the confidence that we could, because we had the right lawyers and appraisers, even the notaries. We had all lined up, ready to go, and we did close on time. And in that transaction, as I mentioned earlier, we supervised the transfer of funds, because the one real advantage that we offer that nobody offers is that we lend to you in Canadian currency. For a Canadian, that is advantageous, of course, because if they're earning revenue in Canada, we just set up an auto debit with their Canadian bank and pull out their monthly mortgage payment. And there's no exchange rate risk for them or us. It's just a Canadian loan. Everything about our loans in Canada is like you're getting a loan in Canada, except we're just taking security on the real estate in Mexico. For an American, there can be a real advantage. We wrote on, if you go to our website and click on the Mexico icon, you will see, when you go to the landing page for Mexico, you will see some icons there that indicate, what type of loans we do. On the far right-hand side, there's a button, and it's for a paper that I wrote. It's called A Case for Investing in Mexico. I would urge you to download that paper. I wrote it originally February of last year. I just updated it 2 weeks ago. It's current. It addresses issues like owning real estate in Mexico, what the fideicomiso is. It talks about issues around cartels in Mexico. If having lived in California myself, and of course in Canada as I do now, I don't see the existence of cartels in Mexico as being a deterrent from owning in Mexico. We have issues with criminal elements in every country. Canada is no exception, and in Mexico, people, of course, with good judgment, they have concern about what they hear in the news. Well, the reality is, if you read the paper, I can statistically show you've got a better chance of being robbed and murdered in the United States as a Canadian visiting the United States than you do in Mexico. So as a lender, that's why we have no reluctance lending in the country. But in that paper, if you're an American, I speak to the fact that we suggest you buy in pesos, you borrow in Canadian currency, and you earn US denominated revenue, either as an American earning income at home in the United States, or through getting rental income on your property in Mexico in US dollars. The reason is I did a 50-year study, and 92% of the time, over 50 years, you are advantaged if you earn revenue in American dollars and take advantage of the exchange rate, because the Canadian dollar is inherently less relative to the US dollar. And you as an American or a person with American currency can actually profit on the exchange, such that you can reduce the effective cost of borrowing from us in Canadian dollars by as much as 3%. So there is a significant savings. Conversely, if you were a Canadian earning only Canadian dollars and you were to borrow money in US dollars, I guarantee you, over a 10-year period on ownership of that whatever asset, if it's in the United States or Mexico and you're paying in American dollars, that loan will cost you 20% more. Guarantee it. So there's a lot of advantages of dealing with a Canadian lender, regardless of whether you are Canadian or an American. So that kind of is everything I'd like to say. I can see that there's a number of questions in the chat. So Brent, maybe you can shoot away with some of those questions and I can answer them. Brent, you're muted.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, we got a question here from William. He's from Texas, and he's got a question if it's possible to put down payment of 20 to 30K and have a payment less than $1,000 a month. Does not have to be waterfront, 1 or 2 bedrooms. So,
well, it's a fair, or like 30. We might be, if that's US dollars, you're thinking our minimum loan's 100,000. Most lenders are 250, but in Mexico that we've seen, but we're 100,000. So with a 30% down payment, realistically, you'd be buying 150 US, you'd be buying $150,000 asset and roughly around 100,000, but you have to factor in your closing costs. So realistically, buying something today in the markets that we're operating in with only a $20,000 to $30,000 down is no. I think you'd be hard pressed. If you had, though, real estate again in Canada or the US like your principal residence, and you wanted us to take security on that, then we would gladly advance you additional funds based on that additional security. As I said previously, we're a private mortgage lender. So we're going to try to make a deal work for you, where and when that we can, as long as whatever we do is not or disadvantageous to you. I mean, we're not so aggressive a lender that we're going to put any consumer in a precarious position. So, but certainly we like to help. We like to do deals, so we love it if we can work with you. And that's what's critical. I mean, today's a learning, you'll learn at the 30,000 foot level how to do a deal. But if you are into a deal and you need us to grind through, specific attributes of your deal and your location, then by all means, let's have a chat. We'll work with you on that. And keep in mind too, again, we're in Canada. Any information that you give us is actually retained in Canada and is subject to all our regulatory requirements for confidentiality. So anything you tell us, anything you provide us is just between you and us. It doesn't go anywhere else. So the more that you can tell us and provide us, the more we can help you.
Great, thank you, Brian. We have a couple questions here. Is there any difference if the purchase party has dual citizenship, say, American and Mexican?
No, but because we've dealt with that. As a Mexican national, you are not required to own real estate in a fideicomiso. You can own it in your name, irrespective of where the property is located in Mexico. But as I said during the presentation, we won't lend outside of the trust. So we don't care what your nationality is, except you have to understand you may be compelled to hold it in a trust, which adds ownership cost, which you as a Mexican citizen would not be subject to, except for borrowing from us. So if you're okay with that, we could certainly lend you.
Thank you, Brian. Rochelle here's asking, do you do second position mortgage security charges?
Where? Because the answer is yes in Canada and United States, but no in Mexico.
Okay, and another simple one. I know you covered what are the interest rates like?
Currently, our interest rate in Mexico is 11.9, which may feel high, except as I discussed earlier, the reality is that if you're earning money in US denominated currency and exchanging it to pay, you can grind that down to sub-9 effective interest rate.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And another question here, just can you do it for a non-fideicomiso in Mexico?
No.
No. Yeah. Here's a question from Vrin. What about no credit score, no debts, but own property? They have collateral and a business, payment up front up to 70% of property value.
We can look at that. That just means we have to find alternate sources to do basically a credit-worthy credit evaluation. But that would be something that I would deal one-on-one with that individual in that circumstance. It's rare that we run into that situation, but if we do, there are alternative ways that we can go around it. We've seen it. I've seen it in the United States. It's surprising that some people don't have a credit score of any kind, and so we have learned on methods for dealing with that.
Great, thank you, Brian. We're just another lady's asking here, is there a checklist of what you just mentioned somewhere? That was I'm not sure what she's referring to, but probably just your requirements.
Yes, if you engage us, like if you were to say, get a, and when, and I can see I didn't put it on this last slide, but to get a hold of us is really easy. If you email us at info@sobankable.com, your email will go right into our underwriting department. And what they can do for you is they will send you, a human will get your, not some AI bot, but a human will get your email. If you give them a bit of a scenario, they will respond. In the response, they can identify what you would have to do to proceed.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, that's great to mention. You can see the website too, sobankable.com, where you can find lots more information. Lots of comments thanking you, Brian, just so you know, and we really appreciate you taking the time for this. Few similar questions I'm fishing through. Here's a question. Does the trust give expats more security against the Mexican government?
You know what? That's a good question. It's a very fair question, and my
Yeah,
answer is two things protect your title, which people don't commonly know. Number one, being held in a fideicomiso, um, like I've seen it, not so much in Canada, but a lot in California, where people steal other people's titles. And it's unfortunate, but I've seen it where you have a granddad, his name is John Smith, and his grandson is named John Smith. John Smith, the grandson, will take granddad's land and sell it, and then steal the money and run away. And that couldn't happen in Mexico because of the trust. The process to go through with the bank to prove who you are, the authority you have, and the right to liquidate the asset exceeds what we would have even in Canada and the United States. So in one regard, your title, because of the trust, is more secure. And as I mentioned earlier, our law firm, they will, for Americans and in Canadians even, you can get title insurance. It's not really readily available in Mexico. There are some places where it is, but our law firm actually guarantees the title. So if there's a defect on the title, they'll fix it no cost. But most importantly, what people don't realize is the free trade agreement, and I know it's changed the name since it was redone, but the NAFTA agreement protects individual ownership rights between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So the Mexican government couldn't come in and annex all the property on the shoreline and steal your property. The immediate response would be that Canada and the United States would step in and intervene. So I have, as a lender, who has millions of dollars that's going to be exposed in Mexico, I have no concern about someone taking title to the property and at the expense of the owner and us as the lender.
yeah, and I will add to that with the trust, it is something the bank controls and administers for you. So there's a lot of security there, and just as a reminder, we're only working with properties that have privatized land, no communal land, no HEDO land, because they cannot get a fideicomiso. So there's that's where we all want to be for security, is on privatized land.
And I'll add to that on the trust, Brent, just so people are aware, because you have the first beneficiary, well, let's forget that we would lend you money. Just in the trust, it's in the trust itself, you as the owner is first beneficiary and your alternate, okay? In the event of death, the property transfers to the estate or to any individual that you pick free of inheritance tax. It's not a deemed disposition because they're already effectively named on the title. So that's not something you get in America, and it can be an issue in Canada depending on the structure that you have. So when you own something in a trust, it's yours to operate. The bank does not want anything to do with your property. That's why they want an alternate. So you can renovate it. You can sell it at any time. You can will it. You can do whatever you want with it. You have unfettered access to the title of that property. It's just held in a bank's name. And they're all national banks, so you don't have to worry about where they might end up.
Great, thank you, Brian. So I have another question here. It's referencing, I think something you said earlier, just he's curious about being the second on the fideicomiso. He's saying if I'm buying, as an example, a $300,000 home and using 200,000 in cash with a $100,000 loan from you, he feels he should be first on the fideicomiso, and he's asking if the second is the only method. I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to there, but
I think let's clarify. I think there's just a little confusion. There's in respect to what your concern is, you are the rightful owner of the property and you have full jurisdiction over that property, whether you're the first beneficiary or you're second. So when we step in as a lender, we become the first beneficiary of the trust. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we have no ownership privileges of your property. In the trust agreement between us as the lender and you as the owner is a very narrow couple of pages that says, in the event of default, CapLink can sell the asset to get out of the loan and repay, we would get repaid and the balance would go to the owner as exactly as it would in Canada or the United States with a standard mortgage. So we are first beneficiary, but for this structure, not to confuse people, but just think of it as a first mortgage on your house in Canada, as you would have with the Royal Bank or any bank, and you're the rightful owner of the property. If you don't pay that bank for any reason, the bank can take a judicial process of foreclosure and compel you to sell the property to repay the loan. So the structure of us being first, the active owner being second, and then the estate or the substitute beneficiary being third on there. And once our loan is paid off, we immediately fall off as first beneficiary and you become second beneficiary. So, don't worry, I'm not going to show up in your kitchen because I'm first beneficiary and expect eggs and bacon on Sunday morning. We don't have that authority. And that's very clear in the documents that we give. I hope that clarifies it for the individual that had the question.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Brian. Just another question here. Are the bridge construction loans interest only for 1 to 2 years to prolong construction timelines in Mexico?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Again, we would structure the term to match your need. The standard construction time seems to be around 18 months. We would probably give you 24, knowing that things never close as fast as we all like. So we're not hard and fast on that. Like, we're not going to call the loan on you if your property's being duly constructed, but it's late closing or late getting the deed issued on it. That's not what we're about. So that is a discussion we would have with you. We have stepped in on financings where the construction is well underway with 6 months left. So we give the borrower a 1-year term. And again, these are open to repayment without penalty. Any financing you do with us is open, be it in Canada, US, or in Mexico. So again, we have a lot of flexibility. We would design the financing to accommodate your schedule, so you're not stressed. What we absolutely don't want you to do, we don't want to impinge you. We don't want to create an environment where you're panic choked. We're forcing you to do something either intentionally or unintentionally that you don't or can't do. So, and we have that latitude. So we are going to walk through your financing to make sure that it's custom fit to your needs.
Great, thank you, Brian. Another question here. I think we have time for about one or two more. Does the fideicomiso and trust go away and the owner has complete ownership / control for passing down after the loan is completely satisfied?
We go away, we drop out automatically when we're repaid, but the fideicomiso is a 50-year trust. And it's a separate legal entity. And if with or without Caplink's involvement, if you're owning in the restricted zone, you need to use the fideicomiso. So it does not end. On our website too, when you look under resources, we have what we call learning modules, and in there it's posted on YouTube, but it's a module, 3-minute little video on what a fideicomiso is and what goes along with it. I would encourage you just to go and take a look. You can find it just by going to YouTube and searching So Bankable, it'll come up, or you can go find it, get linked to it through our website. But the trust is independent of us, you know, but yes, we do fall off as soon as we're paid.
Great, thanks, Brian. I just have another question. Sorry, they arrived late, and just confirming how many years the trust is in place for. Brian just answered that, 50 years. Thank you for your question. Here's another question. Is this for anywhere in Mexico?
Right now, we're only lending in the 6 states that I highlighted in the deck, and I'm just going to go back up here, see if I can get there. Oops. So this is where we're currently lending. And again, all the areas that we are lending are exposed to the restricted zone. So we would be lending in a fideicomiso in the 6 states that are highlighted on the screen right now.
Great. Well, I think that's where we'll conclude things. We're just out of time. So, Brian, you've been
Brent,
getting lots of thanks and praise for an excellent presentation on the chat. And
Brent, if there's any more questions, I don't mind sticking on a little longer I don't want to leave if somebody's got an unanswered question. So
oh, sure, no problem. Let me just double check
Yeah.
if I missed anything. Yeah, there's a guy asking why would you become, or pardon me, a lady, why would you become second beneficiary after loan is paid off? I think I missed that one.
Yeah, but we answered that. Once the loan is paid off, you as the rightful owner of the property become the first beneficiary.
Yeah, after. So must have just misunderstood. More of a real estate question, just what state is the most economical? I'll just say, you know, we actually focus in top emerging markets and find Yucatan state on Yucatan Peninsula is Mazatlan, Puerto Escondido, Huatuco, but they are becoming more popular. So it's definitely a great time to get down and get involved right now. And some more praise and thanks. So what would be minimum income someone need to have if yeah, what would be the minimum income someone would need to have?
That's loan specific.
Yeah,
So we would need to work with you on that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're buying a rental property or a property that you're going to use, because you're still working at whatever home country you're in, and you're going to only use it a few weeks a year, we'll work with you to figure out what income you could potentially have and apply and help you qualify for the loan if your personal income in Canada or United States is not quite sufficient. But again, remember, when we're happy to give everybody a loan, but we don't want to create an environment where someone is unduly harmed by giving them a loan they cannot service. There's nothing more horrific than having a lender phone you and saying, we have to take action because you're not servicing your debt. So we will try to accommodate you as best we can, but at the same time, for our own protection, because we are not loan to own people. When we give you financing, our joy is that you pay us every month and we have no issues, right? And you live happily ever after in the property that you've got, and we've got a good investment. That's really our goal. But if you did, just to be fair, because there's a concern, what happens if I have a problem? So let's just for fun for a second just say, okay, what happens if, let's say you have a couple that's married, husband, wife, and the one that's making the income, the spouse that passes away suddenly. Now you have an income problem, can't service the loan anymore. Well, what we would do, we wouldn't just take aggressive action. The purpose of a foreclosure in any country is to accelerate the sale of the property so that you can repay the loan. So in Canada, for example, now, if we have a borrower that becomes distressed through a third, something that's out of their control, we don't go in and call the lawyers and start foreclosing. What we do is we work with them, and if they'll sell the property, we've done it where people, we had an individual, she was suddenly divorced. We sold the bigger house that her and her former husband were in, and then we financed her into a smaller townhouse that she could afford. So our intent is to not be abusive. Our intent is not to loan to own. We will take legal action if required, but that's rare that we have to be aggressive. If you have a problem, we'll work with you. We'll liquidate the property, pay off the loan, and everybody parts friends. And if we have another opportunity in the future to work together, we'll gladly do so.
Thank you, Brian. That's great. And just saying, yeah, Brian's willing to stay a little overtime. So if I did miss you, I apologize. The scrolling mechanism here is not the most user friendly, so it's a little hard to get through. But Isabella, thanks for following up. Isabella's just wondering what happens to the fideicomiso after 50 years, and I can definitely handle that one for you, Brian. Basically, at that 50 years, you can just renew it or start a new fideicomiso, or you could actually own through a company if you really wanted to. There's options there. I haven't seen that in my lifetime happen, but it seems a lot of people definitely are buying and selling their properties, but it's definitely something you won't have to worry about losing your property. You just can start a new trust. So here's a little bit of a specific question. If you do not have anything on the checklist, how do you schedule a call to go over creative options? Will we be immediately declined?
Yeah, just email us at info@caplink.com.
Great, thank you, Brian. Just another question about the trust, which we just answered. So Adam, just wondering, can you repeat the restricted zones again? Was this for only for land? Okay, so that's the first question. Got a two-part question. Restricted zones, Adam, are basically 50 kilometers from the ocean and 100 kilometers from the border. So basically, in Mexico's constitution, at one time they were more trying to protect their way of life, and they put up these rules that foreigners could not buy there. And in the 70s, they basically came up a legal but secure loophole for that, rather than rewriting their constitution. And they formulated that in these restricted zones, foreigners could achieve full titled ownership through the Fideicomiso real estate trust. So hopefully that helps you out there. Thanks for your question. Second part was, is this only for land that touches the ocean? Or did it apply to inland condos, homes as well? Yeah, exactly, up to 50 kilometers. So thank you. 30 miles, I'm told by an American friend. Yep, someone else is just asking if there's a way to speak directly to you, Brian, and definitely you can get to his Brian and his team at info@sobankable.com, and you can see their website, sobankable.com. Another question, are there minimum liquid asset requirements for owning, buying land in Mexico outside of your income requirements for loan approval?
I'm gonna guess that's an American that asked that question. Yeah, but the answer is no. We, in the United, for those that don't know, when you get financing in the United States, they call them reserve requirements. And basically they want to see that you have some savings beyond your down payment. We don't do that. It's not necessary. Our interest in your available savings stops after we know you have enough to complete the transaction, which includes the down payment and funds necessary to pay the taxes and all the closing costs associated with the transaction.
Excellent. Well, again, Brian, you've been getting lots of thanks from many people, and yes, Jimmy, the last question is 100% Americano. He says so. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Number one, it's definitely a very exciting time for us down here in Mexico on so many levels, and having Brian and his team as another resource just makes it so much more exciting for us. Opens up lots of different options. So, Brian, well, first off, everyone, again, info@sobankable.com and his website, www.sobankable.com. You can also reach out to your Bayside agent for any real estate questions. And we will put this online with a private link for those who want to see the information again, and anybody else on our sales list. So, there's lots of great information. It's definitely nice to have it one more time. So, Brian, thank you so much for your time. We did a lot of due diligence on CapLink and Brian, and that's what we do, is only partner with the right people, and we're really looking forward to working with you more. So thanks for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Let me know if anybody has any other questions. We're happy to work with anybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good night, everyone.